Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Laurie Smith. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another Restoration. And it's 6:30 in the morning here, August 17th, Wednesday. Glad to be here. Glad to be able to do these shows. And just appreciate everybody who's tuning in. And hopefully you're getting something out of this. I know it helps me in my healing journey just to keep on going, keep moving, and keep doing the work. And sort of keeps me, holds me accountable to do this show so that I'll make sure that I'll actually do some work on my healing journey instead of just putting it off and, not dealing with things and not continuing on in it. So, yeah, I'm having a good morning so far. I hope that you are too. And I put the links into the chat room there if anybody wants to grab those to Havoca's website, helping adult survivors of child abuse. Havoca, H-A-V-O-C-A. And then there's the Irving Studios Child Abuse Survivor Monument link. That's what we've been sort of talking about and looking at their information for since I started doing this show here a couple weeks ago. So the links are there. You're welcome to sit in the chat room if you'd like. And, I'm just drinking a coffee, waking up, and glad to be here. I'm having a good morning so far. How am I doing? Morning reflection. Just how am I doing on my healing journey? Any particular things that I need to work on? I'm doing good this morning, actually. I feel really good. Very positive and emotionally well and just feeling good. I haven't done any look at the yoga because I put that off now, the breathing work and the yoga, because I'm trying to get organized in my personal life. I've put lots of things off, actually. That's why I started doing the show again, to hold myself accountable so I will get this stuff done. And I actually just working on getting my calendar straightened out because if I don't do that, then I'll just sort of keep putting some things off. I'm actually 1 year away from a bachelor degree, and I put that off. I actually sort of took a year off from that, so I'm 1 year behind actually where I should be right now, and to finish it off. And so I thought I better get organized on that. So this week's that's so far, but that's what that's been about. But I am going to go back and start the yoga again and continue rowing and continue doing that sort of thing and looking at the breathing work, which is very important for me. And so I'll be working on that. But otherwise, I'm doing pretty good and just getting things organized. You want to do a safety checklist to make sure that you're feeling good and safe enough to be sitting here and listening to this. If you're listening to my show and you're a survivor of abuse, you want to make sure you're safe enough to even listen to something like this, that you're not going to hurt yourself or somebody else. It's not going to trigger you and send you backwards in your healing journey. I always, like to point that out to people because, information about abuse can trigger survivors of abuse, right? And so you need to make sure you're safe enough this morning. And if you're not sure, there's a great Survivor to Thriver manual that has a 60-page like a safety checklist. It's their first chapter is actually devoted to that. Safety First, I think it's called. And it's 60 pages long, roughly, and it's from the ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, Survivor to Thriver manual put out by the Morris Center, a Morris Center program. So you can grab that online for free. Just type into your browser, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse or ASCA Survivor to Thriver manual. It'll come up and it's a free download. You can download it. You can read it right on their website, and get that information, right? Make sure you're safe. And so we'll move into this. I'm actually looking at Havoca's website, Victim to Survivor to Thriver, under their Survivor info tab. Excuse me. And yesterday we were looking at the victim's situation that uses outer world to hide from self. The survivor stays with emotional pain, and the thriver understands that emotional pain will pass and brings new insights. And I'm somewhere in between survivor and thriver there. And then this morning we'll look at the victim's situation, that they possibly hiding their story, right? Hides their story, the victim. And the survivor is not afraid to tell their story to save people. And the thriver is beyond telling their story, but always aware they have created their own healing, right? And they've been able to heal. So I'm definitely more towards the thriver on this one. Victim hides their story, and many times people do hide their story. They don't want, for many reasons. Obviously, survivors will not come forward with their story and the truth of the abuse that they suffered. For many reasons. Many times it's a safety issue. People have to be very careful what you're doing. If the abusers or the abuser is still living, that's a huge issue, and they don't want to, a person can get into all kinds of trouble that way, and we know this. So many times people do hide their story, and also just for reasons like feeling a lot of shame or maybe guilt, or feeling that people will reject them if they find out they've been abused, and it might even cause more rejection in their life, which can happen. It's happened to me before. There's lots of reasons why people stay silent or they hide from their story. Sometimes it's just an issue of denial. So they want to deal with it, so they don't want to acknowledge the abuse, and so they'll hide from the story, right? Hide from their pain, hide from their past. That's a victim. I was a victim, and I used to tell certain people that if they would mention something about their childhood, I usually wouldn't bring it up unless somebody would say something to me first, about their childhood and some maybe abusive stuff they experienced, and then of course I'm going to chime in there and sort of put some of my stuff in there too. But, I usually wouldn't just go and tell people that I had been abused as a child, right? And so it was only be a certain reason why I would tell somebody this. And so I wasn't hiding from my story, I just wasn't so vocal. Survivors then are not afraid to tell their story to safe people, right? To safe people who they know they can trust with their information, and, they're not going to turn around and use it against them, or, sort of manipulate them or whatever. You have to be very careful as a survivor, to not allow yourself to be re-victimized, and if you are going to share your story, make sure it's in a safe situation with people that are emotionally well, who can help you and not make things worse, so be very careful, and know that you have rights, and you can decide who you're going to share your information with. For myself, I went anonymous because I didn't trust people, so I actually started sharing my story and my pain with survivors, other survivors, in an anonymous setting, and I found that very helpful. The thrivers, they are beyond telling their story, but always aware that they have created their own healing, I guess, or that they've been responsible for their own healing. And, I'm actually more towards the thriver, but I still tell my story, and there's many, many reasons why I do. But I do this show, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, I just call it Restoration, mainly because it is part of my healing journey, and I wanted to share kind of, different tools and different things that I find very helpful for myself, and also just to be a voice of encouragement out here for people, because I know what it's like to be on my own and be dealing with this stuff. So I just, there's many reasons why I do this, but not everybody would want to be, feel that they need to continue on sharing their story, right? I know lots of survivors who are beyond telling their story, and they've healed, they've done really well, and that's awesome, that's great. So it can happen, and I just have hope, for that, so eventually, and that's my hope. So we'll move right on. I just want to look at that. That's very interesting to see, the victim and then moving to the survivor and then the thriver to see where we're at. It's like a little tool to gauge sort of where we're at. I think it's very interesting, and that's from Hovoka, Hovoka.org. And next we're going to look at another page from Hovoka. This is guilt and shame. We looked at trust, finished up trust, the trust information that they had there, and then now we're going to look at guilt and shame. This is an actual page that they have set up. It's Help for Adult Victims of Child Abuse, Hovoka. It's called Information for Survivors, Guilt and Shame. We'll just do a little bit of this article and then we'll move on. They said the legacy of child abuse is a distortion of a child's trust, their judgment, their relationships, and their love. But it is a cycle which is breakable. And by understanding the events which led to the abuse and the web of guilt created for you by the abuser, you can begin to relinquish the burden of guilt, shame, and confusion that you have carried for so long. It says, we hope the information in this section will help you to do just that. And so then they go on and they talk about guilt and shame as a child, right? Guilt and shame then as, later in life sort of thing, right? So they said here, as a child is never responsible for incurring abuse, and yet our experience is that on reaching adulthood, every woman or man who was abused as a child feels that they were to blame. So what are the processes that lead to such a heavy burden of guilt? And our experience points to two main causes of guilt and shame. And firstly, it is natural human behavior for a child to innocently demand affection from an adult. And further, it is also natural human behavior for that child as it develops to assert its knowledge that there are favors to be won by pulling the strings of affection in others. And it says, how many of us in adult years fondly alleged by one parent to have wrapped the other around our little finger sort of thing? But affection is part of what human beings need to survive and are entitled to expect from life. So this is what they're saying here. Child's never responsible for incurring abuse. That's exactly right. It's not a child's fault for that they're abused. That's the adults or whoever the abuser is in the situation making the decision or making the wrong choices, really, to abuse a child, right? And so it's not the child's fault. And, our experience is that on reaching adulthood, they said every man or woman who's ever been abused, as a child, feel that they were to blame. That's not true because they say every man or woman feels that they were to blame. That's not true. There's so many of us out here that really never took on the blame. I never took on the blame. I did take on the shame, but not the blame. So I never had any guilt about the abuse. And I think that's why, it very well be why I've been able to skirt and have been able to deal and kind of not have so many problems, that a lot of people have had, because I didn't take on the guilt really or the blame for the abuse. I just was devastated by what the abuse was doing to me, and I was also had picked up the shame from it. But the guilt and the blame was not an issue for me. So they, I don't know, for them to say that every woman or man who was abused feels that they were to blame is kind of not true. I've talked to other survivors who've said that they did not take on the guilt or the blame, but many people do. Many children do, and then grow up to be adults and still feel that it may, it's what they've caused it. It was something that they did to cause. They must have been these horrible things that, that their parents or whoever the abuser was said they were. And also, it actually take that on, right? So it's absolutely horrible. So they said what are the processes that lead to such heavy burden or guilt? They said there's two main causes of guilt and shame. First, it's a natural behavior for a child to innocently demand affection, right, from an adult. Well, children, when they're little, they need it, so it's a need, so they demand it. So it's natural human behavior for that child as it develops to assert its knowledge and that there are favors to be won, right, by pulling the strings of affection. So that's what they're talking about there. But then, they said, but affection is part of what human beings need to survive and are entitled to expect from life. It says it's an adult's inappropriate response to a child's innocent demands for affection that is an abuse, right? So not only is such a response a criminal offense and an abuse of the child's body, it is a cruel distortion of affection and love. So they said in later life, such a child will ask themselves time and time again why they went back for more, not understanding that to them, needing and receiving love and affection was inseparable from receiving abuse. Well, that's kind of true, and I look at that and I think directly of my situation because, I was abused by my parents. I loved my parents, and I really needed care and love from them, and I needed their affection, their love, not abuse, right? And we were almost removed from the home, and then my mom would use that as like a little tool, like a little weapon, to guilt us that she did want us and that the courts were going to take us away, and she begged the courts because she didn't want all of her children to be removed from the home, and so she would try to guilt us, with that to make us feel bad. But actually, we were being abused by both of our parents, so we didn't really fall for that. None of my siblings did, I don't think. But I just wanted love and care and concern, and didn't get it. So I kept staying in the relationship, even though the abuse was horrific, and I could have been. There were several times I could have gotten out and could have gotten help and could have gotten, put into foster care or whatever. But I didn't want to. I didn't want to be removed from my home. There was very many reasons for it, and mainly because my mother was always throwing me out, kicking me out of the house, and she never threw any of the other siblings out. My older siblings. I'm the youngest. I'm the last born. And my older siblings, she never threw them out, even though they were doing drugs. They were violent. They were abusive towards. There was two of them that actually had done some abusive things to the other siblings, including me and my sister. So, that my parents never threw them out. And so when my mom would throw me out, I was like, "You're not throwing me out. You didn't throw the others out. I'm not holding knives to people's throats and, abusing the other siblings." And I've been, I thought I was a pretty good kid, and I couldn't, I couldn't wrap my head around that one. I was like, no, you're not throwing me out. You didn't throw the others out. You're not throwing me out. It was basically, it was horrific psychological damage, really, that was done, you know, because I was born into abuse, right? And so, absolutely horrible. So, yeah, children, I mean, you know, I mean, it's the abusers. It's the person who chooses to, you know, to hurt and harm a child, you know, to abuse a child, really, and it is a criminal offense. It's their distortion of affection, right? So later on, they said such a child will ask themselves time and time again why they went back for more, quote unquote, not understanding that to them, needing and receiving love and affection were inseparable from receiving abuse. So that's a really horrific situation, right? So we'll look at the rest of that tomorrow. We'll move on. And that's very interesting. You can go and get that. That's Havoca.org, Survivors, Guilt and Shame as a Child. So look under the Survivors tab, the Guilt and Shame tab, and then it will bring that up, that article. So positive reinforcement, what are we doing right in our daily walk here? Well, I'm still working towards getting set up and getting organized, which is good because it does take time. Everybody's busy, and you know, just getting back on the healing journey here, instead of putting it behind me. It gives me a sense of empowerment, you know, that I'm doing something right in my daily walk here, you know, and that I'm not going to just allow things to just go along status quo and push it off to the side and not deal with things, right? I'm happy that I'm actually back on my journey here. A positive reinforcement, like a positive affirmation, I could say, the next one up is, I affirm my worth and goodness. Yesterday's was, I no longer feel the need to control others. And this morning is, I affirm my worth and goodness. I could walk around all day saying, I affirm my worth and goodness. That's right. You know, and as abuse survivors, I mean, really, we really do. We do have to realize that we are just as worthy as the next person. You know, I grew up, actually I did believe that I was worthless. My parents both told me I was worthless. My siblings told me I was worthless. Everybody was telling everybody at our home they were worthless, so it wasn't just me. It's just I grew up with this ingrained in my head. And so, you know, that I was worthless, useless, you know, no good, evil, rotten, and all of this other stuff, right? And I actually, you know, I didn't think I was that bad of a person, but I actually took on that role and always felt a little lesser than, and always felt that my needs were not as important as somebody else's, and that what I needed and wanted in life didn't matter because I didn't matter, you know. And so as an adult now, you know, especially in my 40s, working on my healing journey, started to realize that, no, I am worth it. I do count. I do matter. And I'm a good person. I try to be a good person. I could always do better. So I'm always working on that. But, you know, I'm good to myself. I'm trying to be good to myself. I didn't used to be good to myself at all. So, you know, but I'm just as worth it as the next person, right? So I affirm my worth and my goodness. I really like that. That's awesome. And self-care, what are we doing physically, spiritually, emotionally to care for ourselves? I'm looking at a section in Irving Studios, and it's under affirmations. It's under the self-care tab, and the link's actually in the chat room if you want to grab it. It's Irving Studios Child Abuse Survivor Monument. You can just type that in your browser. It'll come up. And it's a self-care tab at the top, and then you just click on that. And over on the left-hand side, there's just a few tabs for survivor information, but the information there is good. I actually like to use it for my own journey, my own healing journey. So they said, seeking assistance of your support people. We looked at physical release yesterday. And the day before, seeking assistance of your support people. We could have a list of names with phone numbers and clarify ahead of time what they can handle and what they cannot help with. You know, write down what times it's okay to call them. So if we have a list of people that we know, you know, even a few people, like, you know, that we know who could support us, who would be there to support us when we need to talk or we need help, you know, we could list those names with phone numbers, just write them down and keep it, you know, by the phone and keep it somewhere handy. And write down the times it's okay to call them and what they can handle, what they can't help with, right? It says look through your address book, use a buddy system. This is seeking assistance from support people, right? Use a buddy system, form a support group, support check-ins, get a friend to phone or write you to tell you that you are safe and a good person, right? That's nice. And I actually have a friend who does that for me quite often. And she's been here on my healing journey the whole time, really, since I met her. And she lives in Australia. My friend Kate, and she quite often will send me little notes, just to make sure that I'm all right. And she'll just contact me wherever I'm at, Facebook or whatever, and just get a hold of me and send these little reminders, and that I'm a good person and that I'm doing good. And she's real happy that I'm making some progress in my journey. And it's just nice to have somebody like that in your life, who will acknowledge what you're dealing with. Designate a regular time to have check-ins with some people, right? Call your therapist, right? If you're having a trouble and you're struggling and you can't really seem to kind of cope in any way, right? Call your therapist. If you don't have a therapist, call a crisis line. I'm always telling people that because I know that I got so far down one night actually, I should have called a crisis line. I actually survived it because I'm still here. But I'm a big proponent for that, and if I ever get that far down again, I will be calling a crisis line. And that's just a promise I made to myself. Call a trusted friend. Allow your pets to give you nurturing and support. I have a cat, and she's very, very much a nurturing and supportive, beautiful cat that I just love dearly. It says, know that friends cannot always be there, so have backup people. That's right. We can't expect people to be there 24/7, right? They're not going to be able to do it. We have to have backup people, right? So if you know that you're struggling and having a hard time, you need to have things situated for yourself. You know what I mean? And I think that's very important. They said, write to a friend, send an email, call someone, use the resources in your church or spiritual setting, right? There's all kinds of stuff we can do. So that's just a few of them there, and we'll just move on from there. We'll look at HVOCA's Survivor's Bill of Rights. And it says, for the preservation of personal boundaries, you have the right to, and they go on to say here, to be touched only with your permission and only in ways that are comfortable. So this is about personal boundaries. For the preservation of personal boundaries, you have the right to be touched only with your permission and only in ways that are comfortable. That's exactly right, because your body belongs to you, my body belongs to me, and I say who gets to touch it, and I say when, and I say whatever. We have the right to our own bodies, and, as children, I'm telling you, my body was violated in every way by 3 people. And, I say now who touches me, and only in ways that I'm comfortable with. And that's right. It's my decision, it's my body. And so we have to be very aware of that as an adult, survivor of child abuse, right? And so it's really important to know that we have the right to make those decisions, right? Personal Bill of Rights. This is from Charles H. Whitfield, MD. This is from Healing the Child Within. And we are looking at, what are we looking at here? Number 12. He's got, how many are there? There are 38, so we're on number 12. It says, I have the right not to be responsible for others' behaviors, actions, feelings, or problems. I have the right not to be responsible for others' behaviors, actions, feelings, or problems. Yeah, we can't be responsible for what other people are doing, their actions, their behavior, their feelings, or their problems. We can't. We can only be responsible for our own. So we don't have to take on that responsibility, right? And as children being abused, we quite often did take on the responsibility of that because we were being abused, right? So I lived my whole life around my parents' moods, and what kind of mood they were in. That was my life. My life, my day and night depended on my parents' moods, actions, feelings, or problems. And so, I would try to, do things to stay out of the abuse, you know what I mean? So if, always trying to mirror my mother, so that she would see that I was taking her side all the time. There was lots of things like that going on, but lots of psychological damage. So yeah, we have the right not to be responsible for others' behaviors, actions, feelings, or problems, just our own. So I think that's interesting. And we'll look at HVOCA affirmations. They have affirmations as well, and under their Getting Started section, and this is, I bring great concentration to bear upon any subject at any time. And that's something I could walk around saying all day. I bring great concentration to bear upon any subject at any time. So I can concentrate on any subject at any time. And that's what I'm trying to actually work on is my concentration levels, my focus, because as an abuse survivor, and just somebody who's just really not looked after my body, right? And just had, lots of trauma to my body, to my brain. I've had many head injuries with fractured skulls and stuff. I've had lots of concussions, and I did a lot of drugs as a young person. And so I really focus on concentration and memorization. So, just to keep my brain, I want to keep my brain active, And so this actually makes sense to me. I bring great concentration to bear upon any subject at any time. I actually really work at that all the time. I study languages and things like that. And, why? Just for fun, really. It's to keep my brain going, because I can't afford to just sit and zone out on TV land, you know what I mean? Because that just allows gray matter to get thicker and thicker in the brain. I want to keep my brain active, and I want to keep my ability to memorize and to think clearly and to conceptualize and to really focus on things. And so I do studies. I'm always studying. I'm always working on things for my brain, to keep my brain, in good shape, right? So that's, I think that's interesting. And we'll look at coping mechanisms. This is coping mechanisms from Michael C. Irving. And he's got a daily, weekly activities to take care of yourself. You can look under the create and use personalized coping lists. And that's from the Child Abuse Survivor Monument. So he says, manage stress before it's out of control. So he says, the trauma you experienced as a child was terrible, and the vulnerability and sensitivity that those tragedies created in you is very real. So all people have to manage their feelings and life stresses. As a survivor of trauma, you have to work at it harder than many others. So he's a survivor himself. Right? He says it is far easier to gain control of a bad feeling before it spirals into despair and a full-blown crisis. So I like what he has to say there. We have to work incredibly hard to overcome these things as survivors of abuse. And so, he says it's far easier to gain control of a bad feeling before it spirals into despair and a full-blown crisis. And I mean, years ago, I didn't know how to do that. Before I began my healing journey, that's why my feelings and the trauma that I did suffer as a child was causing me to spiral into despair and into full-blown crisis, right? Absolutely horrific. And I'm so glad to be on the other side of that, right? But I know what it's like to be there. Absolutely horrific. So he says, take care of yourself regularly, right? And he's referring to a daily, weekly activity, list that we can make for ourselves. He says it's a good idea to make this list so that we can make sure that you're staying on top of things, right? Looking at your regular activity list is also a means of having an emotional thermometer. I actually have this thing going on right now. I don't list what I'm going to eat and stuff like that. He says skipping activities such as eating regular meals, doing exercise, taking time for leisure can be a sign that you are being triggered or that some stressful issue is surfacing that you may be unaware of, right? And what I've started is a calendar. I had a used calendar, just an old, actually unused calendar. It's a new calendar, but we're not using it. Then I started writing things down on, it's like my little, instead of a day timer, it's just a big, huge calendar with huge squares so I can write all kinds of stuff in it. And I'm actually writing things down that I have one for my sort of working life, my things that I have to do, like bills and stuff like that. And then I have one that's just specifically on things that I'm working on, like my healing journey, my studies, my degree that I want to finish up, and other things like that. So that's really helpful for me, to see where I'm at there and what I need to work on, and that way I'm not missing things, right? This is where I'm at. I'm sort of getting organized, right? So it is important to do that stuff. So we'll continue on with that next time. And on their meditation gallery, they have creating safety. This is still, Michael C. Irving, and he says, think safe thoughts. This is about creating safety, right? He says, breathe in empowerment. Know you are safe now, and let your inner child know that you will not let anyone hurt them again, right, or hurt you, right? And it's important to do that. It says, call up or talk to someone who can assure you you are safe. And if you're having trouble, like we've got a minute left here, like I always say on all my shows, if you're struggling, you're having trouble, you just can't, you don't know how you're going to do it, you don't know how you're going to make it, I'm telling you, you get help. You do not allow yourself to spiral down. And, you matter, you do count. And if you're listening to me right now and you're struggling and you're having a hard time, you call a crisis line, you call somebody, and you get some help. Because I'm so glad I stuck it out. 9 years later, I'm still sitting here, and I'm telling you, I am so glad that I made that decision. And I really want to, encourage you to reach out and get help because you so do deserve it, right? And you so do matter in this world. And you do need to get help and make sure that you get yourself, some help and to safety, right? And I hope you have a wonderful day, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.